My name is Dr. Rashanice Candy Tate. I am the curator and co-director of the Legacy Museum at Tuskegee University. And we welcome you here this evening. Would ask you to silence your devices at this time. And first and foremost, we want to thank our sponsors for bringing Chester Higgins back home to us. And that would be Auburn University. Mark Wilson, thank you so much. And we've also collaborated with the English and Modern Language Communication and Philosophy Department and Dr. Bill Indy and the Pan-African Writers Association to bring the reception. So at the end of the talk, we will have food and reception, and you'll be able to purchase books for Chester to sign over in the museum. A little bio information for someone who needs no introduction, but for those of you who don't know Chester, he's homegrown from New Brockton, Alabama, and he attended Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University. Mentored by P.H. Polk, who was the school's official photographer, and graduated in 1970 with a degree in business management. He worked as a staff photographer for the New York Times for more than 4 decades, and his photography appeared in Newsweek, Fortune, Look, Essence, and Life magazines, just to name a few. He's traveled the African continent more than 50 times, and some of his books include Feeling the Spirit, Elder Grace, Ancient Nubia, and his most recent book, Sacred Nile. And so without further ado, because we're gonna take a walk through his life with Chester, I'll say the best, and who can talk about Chester better than Chester? Please, join me, thank you. And we're gonna start with the video.
I want to do a survey of my work. I want to do a survey. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is a survey of my work. I essentially see myself with the camera as bearing witness. And where should I point this? Okay. People are seeing the wrong thing. Okay. This is me inside of a tomb. Just as an ad for my new book. So my time here, something very important happened to me at Tuskegee. While studying business, I had no idea, no interest in photography. I had hired the only photographer that I knew about to make pictures for ads that I was selling in the student newspaper, Campus Digest, because I wanted people, the local merchants, to pay more, so the ads were bigger than their business cards. And I hired the only photographer I knew, and I had no idea that he had a reputation of not meeting deadlines. So the deadline came for us to print the paper, and there were big blanks in the paper where his photograph should be. So I had to rush to his house and demand that he give me those photographs to take them directly to the press, because we were on press that day. And he says, well, I made the pictures, but I just didn't process them. I said, well, what does that mean? So he took me upstairs in his house where he had this dark room, and he started to process them and show me the negatives. And I didn't know how to read negatives. I didn't know what negatives were. So he picked some images, made prints. But I noticed each time he came up and down the stairwell to go between his studio and his dark room, there were some pictures that were hidden behind a dark cloth on the wall. And I was really impressed by those pictures. This is Mr. Polk. Mr. Polk had this big camera, and every now and then, he said on Saturdays, during the Depression days, farmers will come by on their way to the market, And every now and then, he would find, or he would see what he called a very interesting character. It was not something he was being paid to do, but it spoke to something in his history. And when I saw them, they spoke to me because they reminded me of my great aunts and my great uncles, people who I actually loved more than my parents. You probably have some of the same issues. You probably love your grandparents more than your parents, or your uncles and aunts, because they listen to you. Not that, and they also let you do things that your parents won't let you do. So there's benefits in this relationship. So I looked at these pictures and I said, well, Mr. Pope, when I finish doing what I'm doing, I'm going to come back and talk to you about these pictures. And so I went first to deliver those pictures to the press. Then I came back and I said, well, tell me, how did you make these pictures? What is the situation? And he said that during the Depression, these farmers would come by, and he would run out to them. He's a young man, and these are older people, and he would run out to them and essentially beg them to come and let him make a picture of them. And he says what would happen is that in their mind, they will look at him as a young, crazy man. Because who was interested in photographing old people? So something must be wrong with him. And they were alluding to the fact that in our culture, we love young people. We just don't love you to get old. So once you get old, then our attitude changes. So he solved that problem by offering them money. He would offer them a few dollars up to $5 to come, and they said, well, in their mind, if he's fool enough to give us this money, then we'll do it, because now I left home with so much money to spend in the market. And lo and behold, now I got more. So they went back into a studio. It took about 10 minutes or so to make that picture, and they were on their way. And left behind was his vision of them. Then this is his wife, because he had many children. But one wife, until he strayed. And this is me and Mr. Pope. Because of his work, he was my first teacher, my first mentor. But when I was back in the 60s, there were no schools to teach photography. He taught me how to use a camera. He demystified the process of photographing, but he could not teach me how to see compelling. And then I had to find a teacher. And I went to New York and found that teacher. But with Mr. Pope, I learned enough that in a year and a half, I was able to do this. To go to my hometown, because the only reason I had to learn photography was because I knew how much he cost. The newspaper paid him because we had a budget from the administration, but I could not pay him that. So I asked him if he would teach me how to learn how to be a photographer. At the time, I didn't realize what I was asking, because his response was interesting. He looks at me for some period of time. He was taking my measure. He says, let me understand something. You want me to loan you my only camera that I make a living with to learn how to be a photographer? Well, I thought, being a naive, like 20-year-old, and I said, well, yes, sir, Mr. Pope, I'm serious. So he then looks at me a little longer, and finally he says, you know, if you're gonna be fool enough to ask me, I'm gonna be fool enough to help you. I didn't know I was a fool. But I knew after borrowing his camera once for an hour, that I realized he really didn't want me borrowing his camera, so I never asked for it again. But what I did instead, he had hundreds of pictures lying about. I would go and I would ask him about those pictures. And then he would explain to me the situations, and that's really sort of demystified things for me. And then I saved my money, and a year later, I had enough money to get a good camera to go home and make these pictures. Now, my great uncle Floyd, March 4th, and we have a cousin over here, Norma McGowan, a city council member. March 4th was a carpenter. He built homes, and a mason. He laid bricks, and a cook. He lived to die at 108. Now his sister here was a midwife, and she was lived to die at 97. They were my two favorite people. Here again, a different view of them. One of my mother was a school teacher, and sometimes when there were late events with her peers, I was allowed to overnight at either my Uncle Fo's house or my Aunt Jewel's house. My Shug's house. And so I knew their habits. I knew that Aunt Shug, the first thing she did in the morning was get on her knees and pray. And the last thing she did at night was to get on her knees and pray before going to bed. So here was a picture that was burned and seared into my mind from just walking back and forth down the path through the corn patch between her brother's and her house, seeing her at night. So when I began to learn lighting, I learned lighting because I wanted to do this picture. Next to her is her brother, Uncle Phil, at the bedside of a dying man. And then I learned something as a child that they call it now hospice, but in their time, they when people were dying, you had to have someone who sat with them. You had the day shift and you had the night shift, and you had the midnight shift. And these two people would take the midnight shift 12 to 6 because they said that most people die and most children are born between midnight and sunrise because of the effect of the moon on the water, on the blood. Being young and precocious, I asked a question that you're really not supposed to ask. And I said, well, I was curious, do people die differently? And my great uncle Phil said, yes, they do. And I said, well, how is it, what does that look like? What is that? And he said, well, people who lived an honest life with themselves and each other tend to die very comfortable. People who do the opposite die like a person drowning, trying to grab anything to stay afloat. So I spent a lot of time with older people because I couldn't talk to them, but I could listen. I could overhear. I could do what my cousin Elma said, I had big ears. Because I was learning from them. I was learning from their experiences. So those experiences I hear about could become red flags or green flags for me as I grew up and continue with life. So the peacefulness of aging is something that I thought attracted me in this picture, the hands. The other picture has to do with my great uncle again. He was the caretaker for the cemetery. And in a lot of black cemeteries, before people had the money to have stone monuments and stone markers, they used wood and made wooden crosses. But over time, these wooden crosses would disintegrate under weathering. And then you would know where a grave was underneath. And that's why in some cemeteries you have graves, you have caskets on top of each other, because people didn't know there was a grave there. So my Uncle Phil's job was to take a long metal rod and pierce the ground and make sure that it was a free area for the grave digger to dig. Now, the grave digger to me was a lot of fun. There's nothing like fresh dirt, the smell of fresh dirt coming out. And before the grave digger gets so deep, halfway down, I would like to jump down inside the ditch or the hole. I'd rather think of a hole, not a grave. And then I knew that the grave digger would push me back up and my uncle would be on the surface and pull me out. But it gave me a view. It gave me this view that you never would have normally. So that when you're looking at burials and funerals, we're all looking at it from a standing position. But that view that had happened to me a decade earlier is the one that I relied upon when I saw this and realizing if I squat, I'll get that view again that I saw as a child. So, my great uncle I love so much that when he died, I erected a monument to his memory at the cemetery for two reasons. One is that I grow weary of hearing about black cemeteries being overrun and forgotten. because people don't keep them up. Because when people die and the last person you know dies, then obviously you never existed. But there are caretakers who still like to do what they can to keep cemeteries clean. So I thought if I could contribute a piece of art and a marker for the cemetery, it may cause the community to have a certain pride. They were already keeping good care of this cemetery. But now for the people who have no memory of those who are buried, what can I do that will make them feel proud enough to continue keeping it clean as the generations change? So I commissioned this 9-foot by 3-foot by 8-inch black marble, black granite. And on one side of it, this is the road side, is nothing but simply the name of the cemetery, Hartshill Cemetery. And then the other side is a picture that my Uncle Phil really enjoyed that I made of him, and his history to 1825. And I changed history because every county has a map of their county. Like we have state maps and countrywide maps, there are county maps. And in the county map of my county, Coffee County, they had listed, they knew this was a cemetery, but they didn't know the name of it. So on the county map, it was called Nigger Cemetery. So after this went up, Nigger Cemetery got changed. But there goes to show that, hey, taking a vested interest in raising the standard for things that you care about and that are worthy to your community has value and can make a difference. The picture on the right is the booming metropolis of my hometown of 800 people at the time. Now it's about, maybe it's the same, who knows. But you know, business is a fold and what have you, but I lived in this sort of, in the kind of town, it was on a state highway and there was one traffic light and that was it. So if you didn't, there was no traffic light, you would never notice you passed through the town. So the traffic light didn't stop long enough to realize there was a town there. So my takeaway from my great uncle is when I was a freshman trying to decide something about my classes, I went to talk to my Uncle Philip about it. Now, why would I do that? Because you know, he was, even though he was a carpenter, he had basics, reading, literate skills. But so the answer, my Uncle Philip began to answer me by saying, Chester, whatever you decide, which told me he didn't have an answer for me. And then he says, it's important that you make a statement on life, or you could very well die undeclared. Now, I knew he knew a lot about dying, but I didn't realize that someone who's young like me, full of ego, because we at 18, 19, 20, we're so full of our ego, we know the world was invented for us. And we know that everything we do is significant. So for my uncle to tell me that your ego does not really matter was a humbling moment. Because then he focused me by saying, you are going to die. And what happens between, and you can't really do anything with your life that makes a difference unless you accept the fact that you are going to die. So what matters is what you do from the moment of this recognition until you die. What matters is what you decide to leave as in your wake, like a ship passing. And for me, that focused me. I wish I'd had a few more years not knowing that, because I could not unknow it once you know it. And if it affects you the same way, then you deserve it. It'll work in your favor. Oops. So I started now thinking about, well, how can I make statements? How can I make a mark with my photography? How can I share my vision so that other people who agree with me, we echo each other, and those who may find me and find my vision, that they would appreciate it. So I started working, being a young man, interested in women, so I started working with women. But I have a particular history of women that was quite different. I and my family, we had all girls, not boys. So that means that we were sometimes under the tyranny of our cousin girls, which help you develop a very healthy respect for girls and women as people. And that particular, and it sort of suppresses your objectification of women. And that was good, because that allowed me to work on this project with the benefit of that kind of knowledge. So here is a cover to that book, in 1970, Black Woman, and here's one of the subjects. Here are other subjects. This is Nikki Giovanni, who was an up-and-coming poet at the time, a local Tuskegee Catholic woman. I didn't know they were Catholic. I came up Southern Baptist. I didn't know there was such a thing as Black Catholics when I got here. And a writer on here. And then at the right, at the top, there was a co-ed friend of mine, Joyce Carter, German, who today she sees that picture. She tells me that she was pissed off at the time. And I said, well, why, Joyce? She said, well, because I was wearing jeans. And you came over and suggested you like to make a picture, but I had to change into that white dress that you like. So she says, I was pissed at you. I said, well, now that picture's in a museum, it's in a collection of a couple of museums. I said, but George, no, you were in the Virginia Museum. How's that? She said, it doesn't change anything. But okay, that's her. Then I moved from girls to the next book on boys on men. I figured I'd do something about that. And I start with this picture because I want to point out something to people here, mostly women, don't realize that this is the first traumatic experience that boys experience in this culture. I don't forget how I felt as a boy when my mother was not having her hair cut, but demanded that I go get mine cut. And I think every boy feels the same way. Why is it? How fair is this that I have to have my hair cut, but you don't cut your hair? We get over it, obviously, but it's a moment of trauma. So I knew that the only way to show this is to find a victim and make a picture of that moment so that all of you, I can share that with all of you. Here, fathers love to put their boys, their children on their shoulders, and there must be something in the DNA, father, that we do this ritual, because it's very dangerous. We do this ritual where we want to toss our child up in the air. Now, and we have to be, precise about catching them. But God forbid you don't catch that kid, that kid's head falls, and what could happen to their life. But we do it. And fun. Every kid likes to have fun forever. Don't blame them. We still like to have fun as we grow older. The barbershop scene is something we appreciate because it keeps us in maintenance, makes it look good. But I also have this fascination with couples. And I've come to the conclusion, I have a theory about couples. The ideal couple that we want to be is what I call emotional spooning. Where people fit, the emotions fit into each other. Two different people, two different spoons. But they've adjusted to each other in such a way that they fit into each other. It's emotional spooning. However, as you look around you, most couples are various forms of forks and knives. Over time, some of that with work, that can change. But I wish there were more, and I applaud them. And I applaud them so much that when I see them, I try to make pictures of them to share them with you and other people. You'll see some older ones as we go along. This is in Alabama, on a country road. Birds taking flight. So then I came to a point, is anybody here like science fiction movies?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm a Trekkie, old school. But watching science fiction and Star Trek made me think, wow, there possibility existed that I could go back in time, what pictures would I make of my people if I could go back in time? Well, that's impossible. But what I discovered was that photography began in 1850. So I set off on a 5-year quest of hitting every library I could that had photographs. The Library of Congress, State Library and Archives, Black colleges and archives, Black churches and archives, and family portraits locked away in shoeboxes in the attic or underneath the door, underneath the beds. And over that period of time, I collected enough pictures that I pulled together this book of pictures that I think I would have made had I been there. And here you see one of the earliest pictures of plantation workers. Oh, there's a relative here of this man. This is a portrait by Mr. Polk. This is how Mr. Polk worked. Got him out of Alabama into the New York scene. Now, the name of this guy, oh, I closed my thing so I wouldn't go off. Where is his?
She's right here.
Where is she?
Right here.
Oh, okay. Would you stand up? Tell us the name of your grandfather.
Henry Clayton Baker.
Henry Clayton Baker. And he lived to die at 90 years old. And she's almost caught up with him. She's 84. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that there was, during the Civil War, that there were black soldiers? Who would have thought that ex-enslaved people would be learning to read or hearing their grandchildren read to them and enjoying the progress that they've made? But the picture gives us the evidence. Who would have thought before horses, it was oxen that was driving, pulling the wagons? And who would have thought that there was a custom, there was a culture of people who savagely killed other people because they were different? Who would have thought that churches were organized places for people, a safe place for people to share and exchange information that can be helpful to them and their group, and react narratives from the Bible. So then I did this book in honor of my great aunts and uncles on aging. Because aging is something that we appreciate it when people get a certain age and they look good, but getting there is not always easy. And I was most disturbed when I moved to New York and I saw old people going through garbage cans. Now that's changed, we warehouse it. But the attitude about aging is something that we still could work on. So I wanted to show aging that would be a goal. So I wanted to show the positiveness of dignity, like the pictures I saw of Mr. Polk. So I decided to do this project, and that meant that I decided that I want everybody to have white hair. We're not talking about almost old, we're talking about old. And everybody who have a countenance of dignity about them. And I spent maybe 5 years tracking these people and finding them I found them mostly in churches. On a Sunday morning, I would go to the churches and I would scan the audience to see who had gray hair. And that became a potential client, a potential portrait. And so things were slow, but I remember once I was photographing a woman and I said, well, in the beginning I was having trouble finding people with white hair. And I said, I'm having trouble finding other people with white hair. She said, well, child, they're undercover. I said, what do you mean they're undercover? She said, they're on the payroll cover. Okay, here's that woman, and here's another emotional spooning couple. There's something about those who get it, who figure it out and get it together, is so precious, so special. And here's another couple, and this couple is an interesting story. I went to photograph them in their home, and while I was setting up, my assistant was setting up my lights and backdrop, the woman started to have a discussion which seemed like it was an argument. And I really, being young, didn't quite know what this meant and what was going on and how to deal with this. So then the husband, seeing my confusion, like a school child, raised his finger to his wife. Can I please talk? So she paused. And he said, well, Mr. Higgins, you're probably confused, but you must realize that I am a Democrat and my wife is a Republican. And his wife pipes up and says, yes, and when we go to vote, we cancel each other out. I said, okay, I learned something. So then the husband says, the one thing you have to understand in a relationship, if you want it to last and to be successful, is that the other person must know that they will be listened to. That does not mean that your point of view will change automatically, but it depends on what they say. But the most important thing is that as long as the other person knows that when they want to speak, they will be heard, then things have a way of working themselves out because it keeps you on the same team. It's only when you exclude the other person's point of view, when you demean the other person's point of view, when you negate the other person's point of view, that's not a relationship that's going to last. So, as a young person, that was a very important lesson, especially coming out of the divorce, that I was able to put together. And for 42 years now, with my second wife, I think part of that success, I know, is because I took to heart what he told me. Then I start traveling because, in this country, we do not teach Black history. We do not teach fully American history. America has a problem with accepting itself, not only accepting us, it's a problem with accepting itself. When America goes mad, they can't acknowledge it. Whether it's they go mad on each other or they go mad at us, when they go mad, they can't acknowledge it. So we grew up without knowing about ourselves. I don't think the American experience is what we know, but there's another part of experience that we don't know, that we're kept in the dark on. And that experience, for me, meant that I had to do primary research. There was no books that would tell me what was out on the other side of the wall. So in 1970, I made my first trip to Africa for 10 days in Senegal. 1972, I went back to Africa, this time to Ghana, where they speak English, for the whole summer. 1973, I went back to Ghana for the whole summer. 1974, I went back to Senegal for the whole summer. I went to do primary research with the camera. I went to photograph, I don't have the solution that they're my brothers. I went to photograph my cousins. I hitchhiked to get to village to village, place to place. I made friends the way you make friends here. I learned how to take a bath with cold water and sugar, but keep going. I learned how to eat communally in a large dish that everybody was eating from. And I learned to appreciate going to cinemas or movie houses where there was no top. So it was a great experience. And from that experience, I kept going back every summer or every vacation. So I've been to Africa and I visit every year for the last 50 years because frankly, I'm learning about myself, I'm learning about our history, and frankly, it's cheaper than therapy. Mm-hmm. One on the left is Brazilian. She's also, you wonder what it is on her face. It has to do with African religion, Contemplate or Kumba. Now the one on the right is a skeleton of an enslaved African from the 1600s in a New York cemetery. Slavery was not only a thing in the South, it was also a thing in the North. And what I wanted to show here, what I found interesting is that it only takes a few months after you're buried for your flesh to fall. But here, almost 600 years later, the bones are still there. Interior space on the left is in Senegal, and on the right is in Ghana. Here in Ghana, one morning, sunny morning, the Ghanaian people are very lovely people. They're very honest people. And even though you cannot grow up in the South without being Southern Baptist, these people outdo us. They are so obsessed with religion that they, even in their vehicles, have scripture written on it. On Sunday mornings, you have people who are doing solo and group worship of different kinds. And I noticed his father had a child with him, and he marked out a space on the beach. And then I noticed he had his son step in that space and kneel down. And then he stepped in that space, and he put a Bible to his son's head and started to pray. That then to me, as a photographer, that was an important moment, but it was also important to show the context of where he was at. And that's this picture. Back in the States, solitary moments appeal to me. I'm one of those people who love people, but I like to know I can get away from them when I want to. And that there's no better friend that I can have other than myself. The most reliable love I can have is my own love. And to know that about oneself, I can see it in other people and appreciate it when I try to make those pictures. Here we see the same thing in a young woman in Ethiopia. And here I see it in a young man on a boatman on the Niger River in Mali. I also like what I call apertures, openings, doorways, windowways, but as a frame to look through something, to take you through it, so that your eye has to follow it from one place to the next. Here a group of women with their offerings of flowers on a river in Brazil. I shoot color as well, but I prefer black and white. And I was shooting, my first trip to the Nile River was in 1973. In May, I went to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, because I heard about this thing called the Organization of African Unity. All the different leaders at that time, it was less than the 54 there is now, meet, and they have a conference about how they can enhance the independence of other African nations that were still under the yoke of colonialism. And in 92, I made the mistake of taking my son with me on this trip that I was going to, because we were divorced, his mother and I were divorced, and he was being an asshole. He was young. So his mother pleaded for me to do something with him. It was very not easy to do something with teenagers. So I decided to bring him with me on a 6-week trip to Africa. And I decided that we would go to Egypt, where they speak Arabic. He cannot speak it. And to Ethiopia, where they speak Amharic. He cannot speak that. So his only choice is he had to talk to me. And it worked out. It took a little bit, but it worked out. On one occasion, my son said to me something that really sort of changed my direction in life photographically. After going and taking him to museums and seeing all the different statuary and stuff in Egypt, he says to me, Dad, he said, why are you shooting this in black and white? Because the colors are so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. But I was shooting black and white because I'm a purist. And purists are taught that black and white, there's nothing better than black and white. So when he said that, I had to find some place in my heart not to strangle him. Because then I finally thought, maybe the kid has a point. It's not often that parents think that children say something that makes sense to them, but accidents can happen. So what it made me do is that I had to throw out 20 years of work. I had to ignore 20 years of work of black and white in Egypt. But now I had to do it over, but I didn't have to do everything because now I have experience. That's what failures and change teaches you. You go back the second time, you have experience. So with that experience, I knew of everything that I've shot, what now is really, really important to focus on. And that's how that shooting led to this book on ancient Nubia. And looking at shooting in Egypt, I was amazed to discover that not only were there huge temples to men, but there were equally huge temples to women. That the woman was just as equal in religion in Egypt as the man. And that did not change until we got what's called patriarchal religion, where the men, and when you look at, when you study religion, the more I study it, the more I dislike it. But when I study religion, I realize that the people who wrote the Bible were obviously men who hated women because they erased her. This is a picture of a ruler, a Nubian queen, her portrait from the wall of her tomb. This is a headstone with Osiris. You see that Wakanda position? Did any of you guys watch Wakanda? No. You saw that position with the arms? You think they made that up, right? They copied. They copied from ancient Egypt. That's the ancient symbol of divinity that they used to address each other, address the divinity at the temple, address the divinity of the priest, and it's called the sign of nullification, to cross out the negative energy with positive energy. Osiris, 5,000 years before Christ, Osiris is the individual that people thought about when they go die, that you go into the home of Osiris. So then, this is my latest one, out of all that color. After 5 decades of working, this picture was made in '73, my first trip to Egypt. One thing about that trip to Egypt, I went because I was hired by an airlines to go and do a travel brochure. And when I get there, I'm really amazed because this is not the Egypt of the Bible was left behind. Everything has been left out. I don't believe when I read the Bible now that the people who call themselves Israelites actually lived there. Because the whole Egyptian landscape was full of pyramids. And not once is there an acknowledgement that pyramids exist. So here, this picture is made in Luxor. This is what's called the Theban Mountain. Behind the Theban Mountains are the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens, where the tombs of the women rulers or rightful rulers are found in the Valley of the Queens and their children. And then in the Valley of the Kings, you find the rulers, the kings. In studying Egyptology, I discovered that the Egyptians were foremost astronomers. Because of their interest in astronomy, we have the calendar. They discovered the year. We still use their same numbers. They discovered and named, and the only reason we know that Monday next week is going to be in the place of Monday next week is because of them. And they also believed that the sky is what fed their intelligence. They made the pyramids not with a compass for Earth North. They made the pyramid with the compass of the stars. That's why they're still so perfect today. They also felt that the Nile River was an earthly reflection of the Milky Way. So I had to learn astrophotography because I felt it was important. You couldn't make a book about ancient Egyptians unless you took into consideration that portion of there that took so much of their mind. And I had to learn the sky, the night sky. I had to get a telescope to learn what stars were to find things. Like this is found in Sagittarius. You're gonna learn if all the sky words in Sagittarius. And then I had to learn how to climb mountains. This picture was made on a mountaintop that's 8,600 feet above sea level. It took me and a crew a whole day just to get there. We got there at nightfall. The Milky Way shows up about 3:45, 4 o'clock in the morning, and disappears as the light begins, not as the sunlight, as the sky begins to brighten. So you have a half an hour window to shoot it. And then the fun part, it was obviously easier to go back down the mountain and come up. But the mountain was very dangerous and rappelling. I had to learn rock climbing and rappelling just to be able to do this picture and another one. And here's a pyramid at sunrise. The pyramids in Cairo are 35 stories high. Until the Eiffel Tower was built, it was the tallest thing on the planet. The next time you're in a building that's 35 stories, look out the window. This is what you see when you're at the top of it. I've climbed this twice. It's very tricky. The stones come up past your waist. You have to climb it going up, facing the stone, and you have to face the stone coming down, else you'll tumble over, which some people do, and you hit a concussion, you die. But the important thing about this is, it may be that they made this to be a tool, but when you find out, when you realize that when they built these pyramids, the cover skin was white limestone. They reflected light, and they were in love with light. So to them, light was where the sunshine was a resonance of the Creator. The Greeks thought that the Egyptians worshipped the sun. They didn't worship the sun. They saw the sun as the window upon the Creator. Now, they never talk about who the Creator is because men write about them. Men ignore what's in daylight, that the Egyptians felt that the Creator was a woman. And her name is Nut, N-U-T, look it up. And Nut is the night, black of the night sky, space. And they have this interesting clue they left behind. And if you go to my website, sacrednow.com, you'll find a video on Nut that I had made. But this illustration, you see the illustration, this illustration shows Nut as a woman leaning over a planet that is round, not flat, in the downward dog yoga position. Her arm, she is leaning over the planet, but not over the magnetic pole of north and south. She's leaning over the solar poles of east and west. Her hands are stretched on the west, and her feet are planted on the east. Why? Because when the tired sun goes down on the west, her arms become a runway for the sun to go up her arms, into her body, where it is recharged for the next 12 hours. As it passes through her body, because you see that she has a dress that has cross hatches on it, holes in it, you see the light of the sun as twinkling stars during the night. In the morning, because her feet is on the east, where the sun rises, she, with the help of the almighty one God of the Egyptians, that power and catalytic force, she gives birth to it. Now, I want to share with you the name of that one God of the Egyptians, that catalytic force. You may have recognized it. It's 4 letters. It's spelled A-M-E-N. You say it, every religion says it. Even though the religions of the patriarch religion was an enemy of the Egyptian religion of divine nature, they could not get rid of 2 things. They could not get rid of worshiping the sun, so you have Sunday, and they could not get rid of the name God. You have Amen. If you are Jewish, your religion, you say Amen. If you're a Christian, you say Amen. If you're a Muslim, you say Amen. It's the one word that has not been translated or changed. And nobody realizes why that word is so important. But we all realize that once we say that word, now whatever liturgical word we say, there's no word that's more important or more solidly sounded than Amen. Mm-hmm. This is the inside of a male temple. You see the king in the back. You see, some of you may be what color skin the king is in the back. These are the things that you don't learn, that nobody tells you about Egypt. These are the things that I had to learn patiently over time by reading and developing a library, developing relationships with Egyptologists, to find the things that are off the beaten path that tells our story, the complete story. It's like you look at pictures of Brazil. More than almost 2/3 of the people in Brazil are black. But if you look at the posters about Brazil, they're all white people. Yes, they live there, but what about these other people that look different from you? So conveniently, we are erased unless we're willing to do the primary research to find it. And that's why I've done both of these books, Feeling the Spirit and Sacred Knowledge, so that you don't have to travel there, but you have the visual evidence that shows what is there. Temple of the Man again. This mountainside is 8 stories high. This is he dug out a mountain. The Ethiopians use the same technology, I'll show you later. They went to the mountain and they dug it out to make a temple. They dug out the statues. This is Ramses the Great in his greatness. This temple is called Abu-Simbel, A-B-U-S-I-M-B-E-L. This is what happened to Ramses the Great. This is him when he died 3,500 years ago. The interesting things about mummies, when you look at them, you're amazed because they look like themselves. It's not something that we have a technology to do. They look like themselves. You can appreciate the fact that, wow, they are there and locked in that time. And we are over here, across the fence and locked in our time. There's no way that we will ever come together. But they have managed to defy death in a way. How many of you have heard the name King Tut? King Tut died a young man, that's him. This is a bust of King Tut wearing a t-shirt. Notice around his collar, around his neck, the outline of see the craftsmanship that shows his t-shirt. So you may not see, in Egypt they're now trying to make white King Tuts. So if you don't know, ignorance is very expensive. If you don't know, you don't know. This is King Tut in his golden coffin of eternity. Isn't it amazing? First of all, these perfect people care so much about the way to bury you, the way to close out the chapter, that they will come up with a way to preserve you as a mummy, and then they will make gold coffins for you. This coffin is one of three gold coffins who fit to each other. And then all of this is meant to never be seen by human eyes again. This tomb was only discovered 100 years ago. This tomb went undiscovered for 3,200 years. We know from records that there were over 200 pharaohs and women and men. But we also know that we've only found about 60. Those other ones have eluded our grave robbers still today. This is the Nile River coming out of Ethiopia. The Nile River is a very special river because it's the only river in the world that goes north. Every other river goes south. And it goes north because it comes out of an elevated environment. It comes out of the water tower of Ethiopia, 6,000 feet above sea level. And it begins to fall down into Sudan, fall into Egypt, fall into the Mediterranean. So the question is, how do you travel? How do you get a boat to travel on that river if the river is only going north? Well, the Creator solved that problem because it gave them a wind that goes south, a strong wind that goes south. So to go north, all you have to do is float, take down your sail. To go back south, you have to lift your sail and let the wind take you in. This room that you're looking at is the burial room of King Seti the First. This room is probably a little long, about another 10 or 15 feet longer than this room, and the width works out, and it's about 2.5 stories high. This is where this is the burial chamber. Nothing but the burial chamber. The tomb itself has another 5 or 6 chambers in it that you pass through, colonnade chambers that you pass through on your way down. This is the level of worth that our ancestors put into how we put the rest, those that we care about. Ramses' wife, Nefertari, in her tomb. With her, behind her, is her angel. The concept of angel came out of Egypt as something that flies and is free from gravity, that is free from time. But the angel also must have the face of its owner. So every owner who has an angel, that angel's face must look like them. Just like here, the angel's face looked like Nefertari. And this is their language. This is how they communicated their thoughts. Very efficient language. Well, part of this, also the reason I showed you this, there's only 3 tombs that have inscriptions inside the tomb walls. And all 3 of them talk about Egyptian mythology and Egyptian belief. And in this tomb, it talks about creation, and it talks about the soul, the spirit, and it talks about the soul of the king ascending to heaven. What was heaven? Heaven, to them, was the belt of Orion, and specifically was the belt of Orion has 7 stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a belt of 3. Specifically, the star that's on the left of the belt. Now in Ethiopia, they dug out rock from mountains to make churches. In the 13th century, the Ethiopians became Christianized in 324 AD. 324. They were building holy cities in the 13th century, that means 1200s. When they built this holy city of Lalibela, they went to the mountains, a mountain range, they did a footprint of the church, and they dug down 40 feet down and 40 feet around. When they finished, they had a block of stone, and they went back to that block of stone, and like an artist, treating it like sculpture, they sculpted out where you see the pillars, the windows, and the rooms inside. Look it up, Google it, Lalibela, Lalibela. Now, you see on the right, the Ethiopian vision of Mary and Jesus. But on the left, you see the same thing 5,000 years earlier. The Egyptian expressed the same thing, and they called it Isis and Heru. What this is an impossible birth, impossible conception. Mary's impossible conception came because the father was way up in space, wasn't even near her. The Egyptian impossible birth comes because the mother's husband had been killed, chopped into 14 pieces. She had, with the help of the spirit, find those 14 pieces, and then by her own magic with the spirit, hovered over the body as a bird, took the seed of the dead man, and 9 months later produced a boy, who then grew up. You know the difference with the Bible and with Egyptian. The Bible, the boy grows up and he's peaceful. The Bible teaches you to do nothing on your behalf. Just sit and wait. In the Egyptian, the kid grew up and led an army and defeated the people who killed his father and took over. Horus, Isis, and Heru, or Isis and Horus. If you look that up, it's not that this stuff is hidden from you. It's that if you don't know the right questions to ask, you would never find it. So on the left, you have the ideal of an Egyptian, Ethiopian angel. And on the right, you see those churches again. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of those churches, different ones of them. It's called, they call it the New Jerusalem. But here you can see how they went down on either side, how there's a wall of mountain that's still there, and how they chiseled it out to become this church. You have processions of people, processions of priests. And here you have a church again, but this church shows you that Ethiopians, unlike us, we live in the lowlands. Ethiopians live in the lowlands. They live high on mountains between 5,000 and 12,000 feet above sea level. So at night, when the stars are out, it looks like you can touch the floor of heaven. But what's also interesting is that Ethiopians worship in their churches not in the daytime, unless it's a special ceremony. Every day, their church begins at 4:30 a.m. And they pray for tomorrow to come. They pray for the sun to rise. And when the sun rises, their prayers have been answered. They're farmers. And then they leave and they go out and till their farms. This is a tomb of a woman ruler in Nubia. And it's the tomb showing the standing person is her successor, who's doing a ceremony to her, now looking like a sphinx. There are a lot of African Americans who, when they learn about ancient Egypt religion, nature, and they begin to see the parallels between ancient, the vocabulary of belief and religion, they learn that and they see the drawings of people who were African. They begin to dive very seriously into how and what is this about. And the deeper they dive, the more worthy they feel of their ancestors. And a lot of them make pilgrimages to Egypt to go to see the temples and to have their own ceremonies. And this is one here. Women having the ceremonies, acknowledging the spirit of their ancestors in Egypt. So here's the book that with my 1973 cover on the bank of the Nile in Luxor. Then in West Africa, I don't know if you ever heard the name of a group of people called the Ashantis. Well, this is their king. 25 years ago, I made this picture when he came to the throne with the golden stool. I'm down to my last few pictures. So this is now back in New York on the stateside with the sun going down. Obviously it's winter because there's no leaves on the tree. And this is some of the work that I do as a photographer for the Times. This is an old woman who considered herself, she was a fashion person, and considered herself a fashionista. And when I went to make her picture, she said, I don't want a picture to make me look old. I said, well, what do you want? She said, well, I'm going to lie down on this couch, and I'm going to look as young as I can. I said, okay. Pictures of museums openings. You've seen New Year's Eve, the light that comes down. Well, before they had the digital, they had the old-fashioned lights. And this is New Year's Eve, last inspection of the engineers and the electricians checking out the ball to make sure that everything was working. This is at the United Nations, what's called the Security Council chamber. This is a rich woman with our dog and the Brooklyn Bridge. Dancer, drinking beer and liquor, as you're young, you can wind up when you're older, drinking beer and liquor in a bar, right here in Harlem. right of the Muslim woman is a favorite of a lot of collectors because they like the use of the positive and negative space. Plus, you also look into an aperture, her cloth into her eyes. Now, in Montgomery is an incredible museum. I don't know if you guys, any of you know about it or been there. It's a very, it tells a tragic story. It's called the Peace and Justice Institute. I call it the Hanging Museum. But in that museum, it gives honor, it recognizes the many African Americans who were caught up in the savagery of the culture of hangings and lynchings. And here, each of these things represent a county, how many hangings happened in that county, the name of the people who were hung, and the dates. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, because when they were doing this time in this culture, the people were very above board about it. They will publish names in the newspaper. We're gonna hang this nigga this weekend, and you come into town, and we're gonna have a picnic, and we're gonna have a barbecue, and there's photographers who made money off of this because they will come and make pictures of people standing next to the prize, and give those people postcards that same day. And those people could send postcards to their friends, telling them what a great time they had at this particular hanging and barbecue. This is how they use my pictures in the New York Times. On the left is a rich black man who made a life in corporate. And on the right is a very powerful diplomat, a Ghanaian man named Kofi Annan, who became head of the United Nations. And this is a story that was written about me for an award by the Alabama Council of Art. And I just wanted you to see what I look like as a young man. And I end this with a picture of my family. On the left is my sister. In the middle are three of my seven female cousins. And on the right is my creative partner and wife, the giant.
You take some questions? Have some time? Anyone have a question? Answer?
Okay, I have a few. I have to choose which one I want to pick.
Okay.